So coming back, let's talk a little bit about these concepts of torsion and syntropy. Because just like ether is left out of the conversation, so is torsion, and so is syntropy. So what is torsion? Torsion is basically a law of nature that everything travels in spirals. So sound travels in spirals, light travels in spirals. You know, down on the micro level, things are spiraling. Blood spirals through your veins. Water travels in spirals, right? So this basic kind of spiraling motion, this torsion, is what Tesla was talking about that it spins itself. Prana, or the creative force, is that spinning, that torsion movement. And syntropy, and this is an interesting word. When I was doing my research for my thesis, I kept coming across this concept of the opposite of entropy. What is the opposite of entropy? Well, entropy basically says that, that everything in a closed system dissipates, okay? And so if the universe is a closed system, the universe is just going to dissipate. So it's all entropy. Everything is entropic. In the book Life Force, The Scientific Basis by a fellow named Claude Swanson, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later, I got introduced to this Russian astrophysicist by the name of Kozyrev. And in the 40s, Kozyrev was looking out in space, and he was going, you know, this predictive entropy, I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing, yeah, the stars and, you know, galaxies are dying there, but new stars and new galaxies are being born here. So it's not just entropy, because there's also creation going on. And this idea about how we're even here, right? How do I grow a baby in my belly? Does a tree grow? How does a universe come into being, right? That's all done through the opposite force of entropy. And science actually calls this force, which to me is the most miraculous thing in existence, right? The fact that anything would even come into being, come into existence, and then replicate itself, right? This is like life happens, right? Do you know what they call it? They call it negative entropy. And so when I was looking, I was like, I refuse to use that term. I'm not using that term. And so I wrote in my notebook, we need a better word for negative entropy. And so the very first conference that I ventured out to back in 2011, Carl Merritt was one of the speakers there, as was Claude Swanson. And I had the very good fortune of having lunch with both of them on the first day. And I was going through my notebook, and I was asking Claude all of these questions. And I got to the page, and I had actually filled up a whole page with, we need a better word. And I felt so strongly about it. I got to that page. And Carl Merritt said to me, oh, there is another word. He said, the word is syntropy. And I was like, ah. Phew, that's a word I can use, okay? So syntropy is the idea that life is ever regenerating. You know, that the life force, or even the magnetic field, or the feminine, really, right? And the feminine gives birth and is creative, is constantly happening. So entropy happens, but it gives rise to syntropy, and that, you know, the universe is essentially a perpetual motion machine of order being lost here, but order arising there. Order being lost here, order arising there. Again, coming back to what Tesla said, that once the energy is gone, then there's the dissolution, but then the energy moves and the order moves, okay? So the universe is essentially a perpetual motion machine, right? But I don't want you to know that. So that's part of like the ether being taken out, and this idea of the feminine, of the magnetic, of the creative, of the life force, of the syntropic force. And it's just completely ignored. It's just kind of completely ignored. I mean, even the idea that your body has a magnetic field is completely ignored. You know, science and medicine gets that you're electric, right? You get an EKG, they're reading the electrical activity of your heart. You get an EEG, it's the electrical activity of your brain, right? I mean, that's biofield medicine. It's studying the electric aspect of your body. I've been going to conferences the last few years, and a couple years ago, I was at the Science of Consciousness conference in Arizona, where I was doing a poster there. And there was a panel of scientists who were all studying electricity in the brain and how it relates to consciousness. And I got up and I said, has anybody been studying the magnetic fields around the body and how those relate to consciousness? Crickets. Crickets. I mean, and one guy tried to say something, but he ended up sounding kind of like an idiot. He didn't really answer anything. The fact of the matter is that it's ignored. In fact, it's even denied that it exists. Like the standard model basically says that you don't have an energy field. There was even an article in Forbes magazine last year, okay, this inflammatory editorial by this person who was saying the US government is spending your hard-earned tax dollars to use thought field therapy on veterans. How dare they spend your hard-earned money on something that doesn't even exist, okay? So this kind of article creates programming in people who have money, who are going to have a violent negative reaction when you start talking to them about energy fields, and they're not even going to know why. Because somewhere in their subconscious, they've equated that with it taking their money away. All right? So people have been very programmed in various ways to deny the fact that we are electromagnetic beings and that we have fields. You know, that there's this very strong insistence that it's never been measured, but it's simply not true. There's been a device around since the 60s called a squid magnetometer that can detect the magnetic field of the heart from 12 feet away. Okay, so we know that, and this is in universities and hospitals. Like, they know that there's a magnetic field there. Now, what happened in this country back in, I think it was 1913, Kirk, you might know that for certain, the Flexner Report, where this fellow went around and visited all of 136 different medical schools and basically made this rule and started to move in the direction of chemical medicine. And then after World War II, it became even more pronounced because there were people who were researching. I mean, there was this huge surge in the early 1900s around discovering electricity and working with electricity and all different kinds of electromagnetic medicine. And it was squashed. And the awareness of everything was squashed just along with Tesla as we moved into this chemical pill for every problem, looking at life in a chemical mechanical way. It was intentionally suppressed. Along with these concepts of syntropy, of magnetic fields, of torsion. So I want to spend a little time talking about plasma. So plasma is basically what happens when ether polarizes into the positive and negative poles. And so you see this dynamic interaction that happens where they go into a spin together around each other, this sort of dance of the feminine and masculine and one flowing into the other. Essentially, a plasma is, there's a wonderful definition from, I don't know, the early 1900s Webster Dictionary that says elementary matter. So it's basically pure potential. It's free electrons, it's free ions. They're just floating around together in electric potential and the ability to channel electric charge. So when you have a single electron and a single proton hook up, they become hydrogen, right? The first element and become a gas. But you know, the things exist in a plasma state. So when I was learning about plasma, I actually read that it said 99.999% of the seen universe is plasma. And it's so interesting to me that the whole universe is made up of plasma, and most people don't know what it is. Most people don't know what it is because nobody really talks about it, especially when I was doing this research back in 2010, 11, 12. Like, anytime NASA was talking about plasma, they would refer to it as hot gas. And basically, the standard model does not admit that there is electrical phenomenon in space. And this is the difference between the standard model and what I'm going to talk about, which is the electric universe model. But we're just going to go through some examples of plasma. So our sun is a plasma. The solar wind isn't really a stream of hot gas blowing at us, but rather electrically charged particles that are moving from the sun out to the heliosphere, the outer boundary of the solar system, and then from the outer boundary back in. And so there's this continual pulse of charge, okay? I just came across something really interesting, and when I went back and tried to find it, I couldn't. But it was an article about how the solar system is moving into an area of space where there's more plasma density. And our own outer boundary of the solar system, the heliosphere, that the voltage of that is actually increasing. And what they've witnessed is increased electrical phenomenon and increased temperatures across all planets in the solar system. Now that information is suppressed because the standard model wants you to believe in global warming and that it's man-made. Okay? And I'm not going to get into that discussion right now. I just think there's always more to the equation than anything we're told by the news. But that because of this increase in electrical charge at the outer boundary, that we're seeing an increase in charge in the sun. And I think, doesn't it seem like the sun's gotten stronger since we were kids, right? What I think is also happening is that the amount of ambient charge in our environment is going up. Like, did anybody notice how heavy it was yesterday? Well, yesterday was a really heavy day, right? I don't know why. Some days are just more heavy than others. But just there's a kind of density and intensity that is happening. And if you are coherent, you can use this energy to become energized. But if you have a lot of resistance and drag in your field, that extra energy that's coming in that I think we're just going to see increase is going to start affecting you in a non-beneficial way more and more. So anytime you apply more electricity or more energy into a system, it will strengthen coherent systems, but it will potentially take out incoherent systems. And so part of what we're going to talk about is how to learn to make use of this increased energy, and the very secret and fascinating part that I've discovered that's the key to it, but we'll get there. So space is not an empty vacuum. Okay, it's not the empty vacuum that we've been told that it is. It's full of plasma. It's full of plasma of different densities, different intensities, different temperatures. But it's full of plasma, and sound travels through plasma. So sound does travel through space. I mean, have you ever heard any samples of what planets sound like, or what stars sound like, or what the sun sounds like? Well, how do we get those samples if sound doesn't travel through space? It does. They're called Alfvén waves that travel through plasma. And these things, these nebulas that NASA is calling hot gas, well, why are they glowing? Why do they have light? Right? They're not just gas, they're also plasma. They're electric. They're electrical magnetic formations. Lightning is a plasma. Northern lights is a plasma. So our upper atmosphere is different gases in the upper atmosphere. When the sun ejects a coronal mass ejection or plasma, extra plasma, and it travels through space and it hits our upper atmosphere, it lights up. It adds extra charge. It lights up that upper atmosphere. And depending on the gas that's present, we're going to get different colors. These are just some interesting fractals. When you look at the universe, you see this sort of like web of interconnectivity of light. And there's these vast filaments of electricity that connect all of space. So, these are all just how life produces itself in these different, kind of like the same thing, but at different scale, right? So this just illustrates that, but the essential plasma nature of it. Has anybody ever played with one of these? You put your finger on it and you become a conductor because you are electric. Other plasmas, even a fire is a plasma, neon lights, plasma TVs. Right? So what plasma does is it has these different characteristics. So it forms filaments like lightning or like a spark or like an arc welder. It forms cells, sort of like the human biofield or the Earth's magnetosphere or the sun's heliosphere, and sheath. So the outer boundary of your biofield actually has an area of greater electrical charge. It's called a double layer plasma membrane. And again, fractally, it's similar to the ionosphere, magnetosphere of the Earth, or the heliosphere of the sun, or the skin of an orange or an apple. The outer boundaries, right? We always say, like, make sure you eat the skin, because that's where, you know, all the nutrients are. That's where there's more light, where there's more electricity, where there's more life, is in these outer boundaries of things, cell membranes, right? The work of Bruce Lipton has really shown that it's not the nucleus that is the brain of the cell, but actually the membrane, because the membrane of every cell is interacting with its environment. It's deciding, oh, yep, I'm letting you in, I'm getting you out, I'm grooving, you know, I'm listening to signals all around. In fact, there was a passage in his book called Biology of Belief, where he introduces this idea that, you know, in addition to this sort of lock and key concept that we've been all taught in this sort of slow chemical mechanical way that cells interact, there are actually these little antennas that are like tuning forks, and they vibrate like tuning forks when exposed to vibrational information, okay? And that was one of those moments you're ever reading a book and you just have to put the book down, like look out the window for a long time, right? I was like, oh my God, that explains so much. It really made so much sense to me that there are little, you know, cells being like vibrating with the tuning forks with me. So high intensity electric current flowing through plasma takes on a spiral shape. Again, this sort of torsion movement. So these Birkeland currents they're almost like, you know, wires that are connecting stars and galaxies and moving charge across huge stretches of space. It forms double layer sheaths at outer boundaries. So that's what we were talking about, that high electric charge between those double layers. And cells of different voltages, temperatures, density, and chemical properties. So essentially, you know, everything is plasma bubbles within plasma bubbles within plasma bubbles, and just kind of going out, you know, and in too, because they also become infinitely small. Like every cell has its own little magnetic field. Every aspect of anything that's electric has this little magnetic field. It's if anybody's ever heard the Native American story about how the earth sits on a turtle, right? And the creation story, well, what does that sit on? Well, that sits on a turtle. What does that sit on? It's like turtles all the way down, right? But it's really toruses, too, the idea of a torus. Toruses within toruses at ever, you know, greater and ever smaller levels of scale. Turtles all the way down. So plasma has these different states. Dark current mode, so when our upper atmosphere doesn't have northern lights, there's still plasma up there, but it goes into glow mode when it gets hit by a coronal mass ejection. That extra electricity makes it light up. Arc mode is the very strong current, so lightning, sparks, that sort of thing. So basically, the stronger the current, the brighter the plasma. There's also non-thermal or cold plasmas that are stable at room temperature. When I was discovering plasma and I was learning all about it, I was telling my boys, and I was putting Cassidy to bed one night. I think he was probably like 6 or 7, maybe 6. And he said to me, Mom, if I had a wound and we put plasma on it, would that make it heal faster? And I was like, I don't know. Probably not, whatever. But anyway, then I looked it up. And this device that's here is actually for applying plasma to wounds, and it makes them heal faster. And I talked to him, I'm like, how did you do that? And he said, I was thinking about it, it just seemed logical to me. I was like, okay. But they also use it like they're you know, as a sterilizing agent. And it really, in fact, there's a huge growth industry right now in plasmas and non-thermal plasmas. Okay, so in the process of learning all about plasma, I came across this new cosmological story called electric universe theory. And electric universe theory is being put forth by a group of rogue scientists who are outside the system, who are basically saying, you know, we've been stuck in this gravity model for 300 plus years. And even though we've had Hubble out there and we've had all kinds of space probes and we're getting back all kinds of other information, we're trying to stuff it all in this gravity model. And you know, I don't know if you guys ever follow like NASA press releases, but it often, these things say that the people are puzzled or they're confused or this doesn't make sense or, we can't fit this behavior into our model, that sort of thing. Because they're trying to take all this electrical phenomenon and stuff it into this gravity model. And it's just perpetuates. The standard model of everything perpetuates. In fact, I couldn't get 7 days to write a story about this because it has not passed peer review. 7 days. Okay, 7 days is an alternative newspaper in a progressive city, and they would not cover a story on electric universe theory because it has not gone through peer review. Okay, peer review just cycles back in on itself all the time. It's like, well, if it's not known, if we don't already know it, then we're not going to consider it. Yeah. So when I started reading about electric universe theory, I read this book called The Electric Sky by Donald Scott. And Donald Scott was a professor of electrical engineering at Cornell University, I think. But he was also an amateur astronomer. And he started to realize that what conventional astrophysics and astronomy was saying wasn't really lining up with what he was observing, and he was observing all these correlations between the electrical phenomenon that he was studying and what he was seeing in space. And he ended up hooking up with a fellow by the name of Wal Thornhill, who is an Australian physicist, and another fellow by the name of Dave Talbot. Between the three of them, they've really created this whole new philosophy, this whole new cosmology. And when I read Donald Scott's book, I was just blown away by it. I was like, this is the best self-help book I've ever read. This for me, in fact, is the self-help book to end all self-help books. Because what I realized in having the science of oneness explained to me, the science of a connected universe, the science that tied together what was going on up there with what was going on in my own electric body, and this recognition that there was a connective medium called plasma that I had never heard of. That the same electricity that was powering the sun and the stars was powering my heart and my brain. Same electricity. And to have my left brain be able to relax when confronted with a statement like all is one, right? You got the yogis all being like, oh, all is one, let's be groovy. And yet our cosmological story is one of incredible separation. There's no connectivity in the scientific story that we're given. And so how can you reconcile this desire or even this knowing of the essential oneness when you don't have a scientific story that correlates it? And so for me, this book of The Electric Sky, he's so authoritative. I was like, oh, if I ever meet him in person, I'm just going to faint. But he just spells it out so clearly. And I remember going for a walk after I finished it, and I was like, oh my God, the song of the universe is ringing in my cells. And I'm not making that shit up, because I am totally connected to it. It's this huge revelation to me. And it gave me the piece that I was missing, that I didn't even know that I was missing. This whole idea of this electrical connectivity. And then that led to discovering ether, and then this whole other layer of connectivity as well. And I think that the electric universe theory, and this is a cosmology of connection and light. And that this is what people in the New Age community or the yogic community or whatever are looking for, but they don't realize they're looking for it. Because they're informed by Big Bang cosmology and don't even recognize how that just doesn't fit in with the bigger story of oneness and connection. So basically, electric universe theory says that modern astrophysics and cosmology leaves out the electric aspect of plasma and of space phenomenon. It says that electricity, not gravity, is the defining force in the universe, and that electricity is many, many, many orders of magnitude more powerful than gravity. There's no black holes or dark energy or dark matter or Big Bang in electric universe theory. So basically what most people don't realize is that black holes and dark energy and dark matter are all mathematical constructs. And they've been invented because when astrophysicists are looking at a galaxy, for example, there is not enough gravity to account for it hanging together and not flying apart. There's not enough gravity present. Well, if there's not enough gravity, then there's got to be some kind of thing in the middle that's sucking it together. Oh, but that's still not quite enough. So now we need some mysterious thing on the outside pushing it together. It's all math. It's not observable or observed phenomenon. And if you ever look at artists' renditions of black holes, there's actually light coming out of them. Has anybody ever noticed that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, there are no images of black holes because there are no black holes. You know, in the EU model, the center of the galaxy is more like the center of a hurricane. It's like a calm center. So think about that. Think about the difference between a calm center and a black hole. Right? I mean, even this whole sort of concept of a black hole, it's kind of scary and depressing. But if you put a calm center there instead, it's really different. There's all these different ways that we are referring to reality that we don't even realize these concepts are informing us. So it's still very much academically rejected. And if you go look it up online, you're going to find these things that try to debunk it and people that, you know, devalue it. But what I found, and I actually had the good fortune of speaking at the Electric Universe Conference back in August, and actually was on a panel with Don Scott, which was kind of exciting to be. But he, you know, he's a real science guy, and he's a little askance at me because, you know, they're working really hard to make it acceptable, you know, and I'm a tuning fork waving healer. So I'm not a hard scientist. I skipped physics and chemistry and all that kind of thing in school. You know, I'm really, like I said, I'm just a person who has encountered this phenomenon and gone looking for answers, but certainly not a hard scientist. So there's two views of our sun in this. So our current model says that the sun is a thermonuclear furnace of hot gas burning itself out. And they've been trying to replicate what they think is how this works, right? Nuclear fusion for the last 60 years, and they have not succeeded, all right? In this story, it's completely disconnected from the rest of the galaxy and the universe, and this hot gas is blowing from it, flowing around us. But in the electric universe model, the sun is a dynamic electric plasma that is powered by the unlimited universal power source, fed by intergalactic Birkeland currents. That's a really different concept, isn't it? That the sun's connected to the whole universe and that it's powered by this ambient force, rather than this individual burning itself out. And that the solar wind is a stream of electricity from the positively charged sun to the negatively charged earth. And when I was at the EU conference in August, I met a team of scientists who are working on creating the electric model of the sun in a lab, and they are making progress. It's called the Sapphire Project, if anybody wants to look that up. I was sitting outside on a patio at this hotel where the conference was, and there's a fellow sitting talking with a group of people next to me, and I heard him say, and we've discovered at certain frequency levels that double layer membranes spontaneously appear. And I was like, he's speaking my language, I need to talk to him. So I actually may be partnering with that team in order to see if we can show the double layer plasma membrane of the human biofield. Because it's kind of a low-hanging fruit, and it shouldn't be that hard to show that charge differential at the outer boundary of the field. Okay. From the smallest particle to the largest galactic formation, a web of electrical circuitry connects and unifies all of nature, organizing galaxies, energizing stars, giving birth to planets, and on our own world, controlling weather and animating biological organisms. There are no isolated islands in an electric universe. So coming back again to double layer membrane, so this is just a model of the sun and of the earth, the idea that, you know, we're bounded by these bubbles. Here are some images that I just think are interesting, and it says the metaphysics of plasma. So, you know, historically when we look at things like human energy fields, they're called like metaphysical or, you know, in some cases like pseudoscience, right? Woo-woo, what are some of the other words, you know, to just kind of be like, oh, this stuff is made up by primitive and clueless people, right? And that it has no real basis in science. But we see these sort of fractal representations, you know, just if you put iron filings down around a magnet, it will form, it will show you that invisible magnetic field that's present around a magnet, the Earth's field. And even in a lab, these plasma bubbles show up. So these are just, you know, different models of the fractal nature. Filamentary currents, you know, the idea that we have meridians or nadis in our body, these filamentary currents of electricity that information flows along, not so different than the filamentary currents in space or in our brain. This idea of the spiraling currents, you know, in Birkeland current, you've got this polarization between the male and the female, or the positive and negative charges, and they spiral around each other. Well, in like the Vedic tradition, for example, we have that in our own body, these sort of spiraling positive and negative currents that go through us, very similar in structure. And same with this idea of a plasma focus device, how it creates something that looks like what we would call a chakra. So our electromagnetic bodies underlie and surround our physical body. And what I've really come to see is that the magnetic field is really what we call mind or consciousness. It's both our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. And that in this model, rather than your mind being inside your body is actually inside your mind. And it's working from this that I've been able to really heal and change my body. I don't exercise. I don't take any supplements. I don't really like green vegetables very much. I cook them and put them on my plate, but then I hope nobody notices when I don't eat them. My kids are always like, Mom, eat your vegetables. I pretty much eat whatever I want. You know, I've healed all my digestive issues. But I stay fit because I understand that my body is a holographic projection of my mind. And I've learned how to combine having a coherent biofield with using the creative power of the word very carefully. We're incredibly creative beings. And every time you say, I am, you are creating. So if you look in the mirror and you go, I am fat, I am ugly, I am this, you're creating that. Every time you look in your checkbook and you go, I am broke, I am poor, you are creating that. So you have to be extremely careful about what you think and what you say, because every single word and every single thought is an affirmation, So if you want to be healthy and you want to be your healthy size and you want anything, you have to speak it. You have to speak it and you have to think it. There's this wonderful quote that I always refer back to that says, I have told my people they can have what they say, but my people keep saying what they have. So there's a little bit of a hurdle to get over there. You know, you got to fake it till you make it kind of thing. But that's the way to do it. You know, you have to generate the feeling that you think that whatever it is you desire is going to give you. Because the feeling is primary. It's in your field. You have to create it in your field through resonance, through words, through belief, through a clear signal, before it starts to show up out there. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So, and we're mostly water. And water is highly suggestible. It's so interesting in our culture. We'll accept that sand or silica can hold memory, right? We make computer chips, so sand holds memory. We accept that quartz crystals will also hold information. A big part of technology is the fact that quartz crystals hold information. But we can't accept that water does. Like, where does that? Water is a crystalline structure. It's really no different than sand or a crystal, right? So we accept that these things do, but we don't accept that water does. And, well, you guys probably do. But, the official scientific thing is like, bah, what nonsense, water doesn't hold memory. Do you know why that is? Can anybody tell me why that is? I know, I'm pretty sure I know why it is. It's because of the need to discredit homeopathy. That's why. Yeah. But anyway, regardless of the need to discredit homeopathy and going back to the Flexner report, water it is highly suggestible. You are like over 90%, and I've read maybe even 99% water by molecules. So 99% of the molecules in your body, not necessarily your volume, right? Volume's like 70%. So anything that you tell yourself, you are imprinting in your water. And one of the things that, I'm going to do a water blessing after lunch, and I'll tell the story then. But you circulate water, right? Anything you tell yourself and the water believes it, you pee out into the water supply. And that becomes a problem, as we'll learn later, right? So, and what is water but the earth? What are you but earth? You're a steward of earth. It doesn't make sense to tell the water molecules in your body that they're not good enough. What kind of nonsense is that? Where did any of that even come from? Do you know that I found, working with people, that at the kernel of pretty much every dysfunction in everybody is some kind of story of unworthiness? And that's just a big fat lie. It's just nonsense. That's just programming. So I really want you to pay attention to when you start running any of those stories of not worthiness or guilt. I've started to really look at life as a video game lately. and that, first of all, you got to figure out what your mission is. And then you got to, go off and accomplish it. You got to solve all these problems along the way. You solve a whole bunch of problems, you get to level up. And then you have more freedom, but you also have more complex problems. And you got to, gather resources and keep your health up, right, as you go on your mission. A lot more fun thinking it's a game than it's a school, I think. Well, you're going to learn all these lessons. No, you got to solve problems. Okay, this is not written down anywhere, so if you have notes, I would suggest writing this down. I'm going to share with you the 5 steps to solving any problem, because this is really what it's all about. The more problems you solve on any level, whether it's your health problems, whether it's your relationship problems, whether it's your financial problems, they're all just problems that you need to solve in order to level up, okay? The first thing you got to do is you've got to identify what the problem is. You've got to have a very clear definition of this is the problem. Then you have to believe that it is possible to solve the problem. And this is where most people get stuck. Because most people who can't solve their problems are running subconscious beliefs that it's not possible to solve their problems. And those subconscious beliefs are overriding any conscious attempts. So what you do is you say to yourself, you imagine the problem, and you say to yourself, I believe it's possible to solve this problem. And then you notice where in your body you feel resistance. So let's just do that right now. So I want you to think of a problem you haven't been able to solve. I want you to say to yourself, I believe it's possible to solve this problem. And I want you to notice where areas of restriction, discomfort, resistance arise in your body. Is anybody feeling resistance? Yeah. So what you want to do is just bring attention to those places where you have resistance. Just notice it. And you don't have to do this right now. This is an exercise you can do at home. You can do this all the time. But you want to get to a place where you can say that statement, I believe it's possible to do this, and not encounter any resistance in your body. You get to a place where you're like, okay, I'm 100% on board. I believe it's possible to solve this problem. The next thing you want to do is you want to desire it with all your heart. You want 100% of your being to desire and to be determined to solve that problem. Then you want to believe that you're a resourceful person and that the resources you need to solve the problem are at hand. I believe the resources to solve this problem are at hand. And then you locate those resources, and then you implement those resources. And then you move on to the next problem. We get places in life, we become successful at anything when we successfully solve the problems that are in our way of getting there. You know, my kids growing up would always come to me and they'd be like, Mom, I've got this problem, da 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 da. And I'd say to them, well, you're a resourceful person. Go figure it out. Go find the resources you need to figure that out and come back and tell me when you solved it. And they would. And so as a consequence, my boys are super resourceful. Like, they are always looking, I'm resourceful, resources are at hand, right? In the video game that is life, like, you know, right? In a video game, the resources that you need to solve your problem are always there. You might not see them, but they have to be there, otherwise you wouldn't be able to level up, right? So just believing that they're there and looking for them, they appear. So, you know, this is any problem you've got. If you apply these 5 steps, you'll be able to solve it. But the belief is the most important thing. And, you know, what I've found working in people's fields, I mean, I've really had this incredible privilege to be inside people's minds. You know, I mean, I've been in thousands of people's minds, poking around with my fork, making them cry, finding sad memories, you know, like, it's kind of like when they, you know, they operate in the brain and they can, you know, press a certain part of the brain, it'll make your arm do that. You know, I found that there's certain places you can poke in the field that will make people cry or twitch or things like that. But as we find these things and we discharge them, then people, you know, feel a lot better afterwards. Just this opportunity to see how our minds work on this subconscious level and see just how much beliefs inform our experience. You know, you really got to step back and question your beliefs. One of the exercises that my husband and I did for a while was that we would always call each other out when we were speaking self-limiting beliefs. You know, like, that's a story. And that was really helpful to do, to have somebody mirror back to me when I was like using my word creatively to diminish myself and to diminish my own potential based on some story, some program that I was running. It might have been ancestral, might have been cultural, you know, who knows where I picked it up. We're running a lot of programs. You know, I can tell you that, you know, when it comes to things like prosperity, for example, right, is that we are so full, that part of your inner video game is so full of constructs and walls and beliefs and stories that are not even your own. They're just part of the game. You know, that, oh, spiritual people, you know, aren't rich. Or, you know, about passing through the eye of a needle into the kingdom of heaven, or however that quote goes. Or, you know, I don't feel right taking money for healing. Or, you know, rich people are bad. I mean, there's all of these different constructs that we say, oh, that's me. I'm that. And we, you know, gather them around ourselves, and then we wonder why we're only able to put $10 in our gas tank when we stop for gas. You know, it's because you're hemmed in by all of these stories and beliefs, and, you know, but are basically, what I've come to see are like target practice, you know, in your own mind. When these things pop up, you go, pew, and they're like not self, because these beliefs are everywhere, these programs running to keep you small, to keep you limited, to keep you believing in your own powerlessness, and they're not even you. They're just cultural stories and beliefs. One of the most powerful things I've ever done is to really step back and examine all the beliefs that I've been adhering to, right? I mean, even the belief about Big Bang, right? Just that alone, we all believe in Big Bang, that's what we're told. You know, they say that they figured out that the age of the universe is 13.7 billion years. But if you put that number next to the American national debt in dollars, right, what is it, like 220 trillion? I don't know, it's really high, right? It's crazy high. Like, the universe looks really young when you put those two numbers side by side, right? You know, it just, like, people say, oh, it's the universe is, really? You really know that? You really know that the universe is 13.7 billion years old? And we just believe all these things that we're told. We don't step back and question them. And one of my regular practices is to step back and widen the lens, and step back and widen the lens, and step back and widen the lens, and keep on looking at things from a bigger and bigger picture and questioning, really questioning everything that I've been told. I question everything. It used to drive my mother crazy. You know, I'm hugely skeptical about most stuff that I'm told because it doesn't ring true. Like, truth actually does have a ring to it. You can really hear it with the tuning forks, and you get into that place where we've kind of released the distortion, released the heavy energy, and come into this true tone, this true expression. There's a ring to it. There's a brightness. There's a resonance. And it's really tangible. And it's in this, you know, this electric and electronic structure when we find our sweet spot in our tuning, then we're in resonance with ourselves and better able to adapt to our environment. And this is all happening at the level of light, not at chemistry. All happening in light and sound too, because there's definitely acoustic things going on in your body as well. So this coherent biophoton field, which permeates and envelops the solid body, you know, is assumed to, I mean, I think people are often reluctant to, like, make absolute declarations. But, you know, if you look at something like an elite athlete, a snowboarder, and the crazy things that, you know, that they can do, if their body was just relying on chemical communication to, you know, it just wouldn't happen, right? I mean, in order for everything to be computing rapidly with these incredible intricate moves that people do, there has to be a faster system. And it is. It's your light body. So you really are light. You know, on a very fundamental level, you are light. And on every level, because we have electricity in our whole body. It's not just your brain is electric and your heart is electric. Your blood carries the charge. Your collagen microfiber system is all a semiconductor that's sending light signals all the time. Your bones are piezoelectric. Your bones make light when you compress them. I have this theory that part of what moves our lymph system is the electricity in our bones, that our lymph is magnetic and our bones are electric. And that, like, you know, when you bounce on a rebounder, it helps your lymph flow, but what are you really doing but compressing your skeletal system too? Kind of an interesting thought. I mean, think about it. You have light in your bones. Your bones are alive. So I want to come back to this sort of biofield anatomy hypothesis after we have sort of talked all about electricity and the fact that the body is electric and that we have this magnetic field and that, you know, this plasma fractal concept. The biofield anatomy basically says that you are an electric being with a magnetic field around you. Your memories are stored in this magnetic field, and that we can access these memories and modulate them with sound. And that in doing so, we can get the resistance and the noise out of your electronic system. We're working at the source of what is going wrong in the body, the blueprint or the template where the information field is, and changing that, and that helps to resolve whatever is going on in the body. And this is the map. I thought it would be kind of fun to spend a few minutes just going through if people have questions. I know that's kind of hard for you to see what it says. There are ones out there. But basically, this is what I figured out, like all these different zones relate to. And in this map, one of the things that I identified, and you see the spots by the elbows there, what I discovered is that there are fixed points in your field that don't move. So you know how I figured I could click, drag, and drop things? Well, I found these 2 points in the field that are right about here. And what I discovered is that this one, and it's kind of like the size of a hockey puck, only it seems a little maybe more oval than round. But that's how I perceive it, slightly oval. Holds the energy of your father. And I can stick a fork in this particular spot in you, and I can tell you all about your dad's personality. And then I can feel the space in between, and I can tell you about the quality of your relationship with him, even if he's passed. And then this one holds your mother. And same thing over there, okay? So when I started exploring electric universe theory, I found that these glyphs are all over the world. And that electric universe theory points to them because it's also a spontaneous plasma formation that happens in the lab. Isn't that interesting? And you know, our ancestors were much more connected to their ancestors and much more connected to subtle phenomena than we are. So, you know, to find correlate there was really interesting. But let's just go through just for a couple minutes, and I want you to, who's got pain anywhere in their body, and I'll tell you what it relates to on the map. Head. Which side? Well, I mean, car accidents definitely are going to create injuries in people, and you go, well, how is that emotional? But what I've really found is that when I'm reading the record of people's fields, that there was generally a significant period of stress just prior to where these accidents happen. And very often people are in a position in their life where things weren't working, where the universe was saying, hey, you know, I need a different job, I need a different relationship, I need a different living situation, but, you know, maybe because you were bottle fed on a schedule and you don't recognize satiation when you've got it, that you don't release from whatever isn't working, but keep on trying to do the same thing, hoping it will get better. And when we're stuck in the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, we tend to start to become imbalanced in our field, which then can lead to injuries and accidents. And very often people end up with injuries in these specific areas where they were imbalanced. So the imbalances that I find around the head is basically a tendency to not be in the present moment, but rather thinking, you know, worrying about the future, or you know, having regret or remorse about the past. So just kind of like a tendency to just not be here now. So did what I just say have any bearing to like your experience with your accident? Were you in a period of stress? Were you worrying? Yeah, a lot of stress. Yeah. It's generally the case in any kind of injury or accident. You know, even random stuff. I was out dancing and my knee blew out for no particular reason. Oh, but you know, you had all these things going on emotionally there. So, good. What else? Yes, which side? Left. So that's frustration over unmet needs. Anything that comes up in the left hip area, the person is generally running a lot of frustration, and very often was bottle fed. Not always, but you know, what I find with a lot of people with the left hip issues is it's this sort of chronic unmet needs just kind of going on and on. Does that make sense for you? Yeah. Okay. The left side of the neck is that which we don't say or express. So, you know, there's actually a structure in the field called that I call the throat filter that shows up right about here. And when we're, you know, not speaking our truth, not advocating for our needs, not engaging in creative expression, not singing, not speaking our truth, then energy tends to get restricted and pile up here. In fact, virtually every case of vertigo that I've ever treated was a person had such a strong filter in place, and there was huge amounts of just unexpressed energy just sort of spinning around here. So I would say that there's something that you're holding back that wants and needs to be expressed. And it might be emotion, you know, it could be grief that, you know, you've been too busy to express. It might be a song that wants to be written. It might be speaking up for yourself at a job or in a relationship. You know, it can be any number of things, but basically it's energy that wants to come out, that we're holding back. Good. All right, who else? The right foot has to do with just walking forward in life. You know, like what are we encountering as we walk forward, and how do we feel about it? So very often when people are reluctant to go to a job or feel like the life that they're moving through is uncomfortable, or you know, that's something you're contracting away from instead of graciously sliding into. Does that make sense? Yeah. Ah, that's a good one. So what I've discovered with heartburn is that most people who suffer from heartburn, that their solar plexus center, instead of being open and expanded, there's very often some kind of character, maybe more than one, but generally at least one, who is imposing their will on you. So what it does is that energy pushes your own will energy in, which then creates a reflux. So how I treat that is I strengthen people's will centers and invite them to be mindful of when they are having a heartburn attack, who is pushing their will in on them. And yeah, I mean, it could be your own inner critic. You know, the inner critic is a construct that everyone has, or I should say most people have. It's definitely a non-beneficial construct that I think a lot of people suffer from. You know, it's one of the observations that I've made that people really beat themselves up quite terribly with this inner critic. It's a non-beneficial relationship, and it's not necessarily self. Again, it's just part of the programming of unworthiness that we've been, you know, programmed with. It's not self. So, you know, that's just something to be mindful of. You know, if it comes from self-critic, holding self back, self-judgment, you know, I say one of the things you can do that's not always easy to get rid of that construct, but is to hire an inner coach as well, so that you get to listen to the critic, but you also get to listen to the coach. And, you know, what's the difference between a critic and a coach? I mean, ultimately, they both claim, you know, the critic claims to be there to help you, but the critic is generally unkind. And so when you have an inner coach, the coach also wants you to be the best person you can be, to hold you to the highest standard, but ideally they're going to do it in a kind and loving and friendly way. You know, because I ask most people, like, if your inner critic was personified and outside of you, is that somebody you'd hang out with? No. You'd be like, I'm sorry, you're abusive, goodbye. And yet we'll tolerate it inside our own head. That's illogical, right? So don't tolerate that, you know? Be kind. It's really important. It's really important. Yeah, a lot of autoimmune stuff that I see in people is actually this inner division around, you know, the perfectionist critic and then the not good, you know? And so people end up with these it's like self turned against self. Perfectionism is a very dangerous practice. You know, I'm an idealist. I'm an unapologetic idealist. And I will always hold the ideal in mind. But the difference between an idealist and a perfectionist is that an idealist knows that getting to perfection is sloppy and is willing to go through the sloppiness. Whereas perfectionists are so rigid and want perfection all the time that they stress themselves out completely, you know, and it becomes you working against yourself. If you make room for the messiness. You know, when we teach biofield tuning classes, we say, there's this great quote that it says, in order to learn anything new, you've got to be willing to be an idiot for 15 minutes. And, you know, and that first time when you're up and all these people are watching you and you're trying to hit a tuning fork against a hockey puck and find subtle, invisible stuff in somebody's field, like it's a little nerve-wracking for people, you know? But once you get through that first 15 minutes, then it just gets easier. And it's the perfectionists that have the hardest time, you know, with something like that, because they're trying to expect themselves to be perfect instead of making room for the fact that it's messy. Learning anything new is messy. And that's okay. The more we do it, then we ultimately arrive at perfection without ever having to be a perfectionist. Good, a couple more. So the right shoulder relates to saying yes when we mean no, putting other people's needs ahead of our own, being a caretaker, a caregiver, an accommodator. I'm often treating the right shoulders of single mothers who are also massage therapists. You know, and the imbalance that comes in the right shoulder is resentment. Because if we continually put other people's needs ahead of our own, if we say yes when we know we're acting from this imbalanced place, we become resentful and then we blame them. You know, but it isn't really their fault, it's our fault for taking on too much. Does that make sense for you? Yeah. Who else? Yeah, so the right hip is the hip of chronic overdoing. So everybody that, again, without exception, that I've worked on that needed a right hip replacement, busy mind, busy body, always going, always doing, always thinking, go, 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 do, 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 think, 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 constantly, never stop. And aggravated right hip stuff is usually a mental condition that I call squirrel in a box, where the mind is just doing this, right? And that really fires up that right hip. People, there's a pattern, you know, and if anybody is a body worker, you see it. A lot of people have right hip, left shoulder issues. And this is staying busy. The busy mental body will override an emotional body. Certainly a busy mental and physical body absolutely overrides an emotional body. Staying busy to avoid feeling sadness. Because the left shoulder is sadness, grief, and loss. And as long as you stay busy and you're out in front of it, you know, it's when you stop that those emotions settle in on you. So as long as you stay busy and you keep your mind busy, you keep them at bay. Good. The woman in the green sweater, did you have a question?
I was going to ask left shoulder.
Yeah. Yep, left shoulder. Sadness, grief, and loss. I worked on a woman once. I was doing demo chair sessions, and she had all of this pain in her left shoulder. And so I'm coming in, and I find this really heavy area just off of her shoulder. And I said to her, has anything sad happened for you in the last 2 years? And she said, oh, my husband died 18 months ago. And I'm just so sad. And she said, but my shoulder, you know, it hurts so much, and I've had MRIs, and I've had this, and I've that, and physical therapy, and nothing's fixing it. Well, it was psychosomatic. She had all this heavy, undigested grief stuck here, weighing on it. And so the beautiful thing about the tuning forks is you can pick up that loud spot, and you can move it back to center, shift the mass of the magnetic field and the distribution. And within minutes, I mean, this was a 15-minute seated chair session, she sat up and she was moving around and the pain was completely gone. And she was looking at me like she just couldn't believe, like she'd had all of this medical intervention, and me, with the tuning fork in 15 minutes, identified it and fixed it. She was totally blown away, right? So people who have depression, who have undigested sadness, who have a lot of depression, honestly, guys, is inherited. A lot of it's inherited. You know, this was for me, I had this chronic low-level sadness that I was always carrying around. And at one point, when my practice was getting really busy, I used a hockey puck in my left hand, activate it, and this was happening thousands of times a week. And very suddenly, I had a sort of a bout of tendinitis kind of come out of nowhere. It started with my hand and went up my arm and into my neck and even down my chest on the side here. And I had to stop holding a puck and go through rehab. But in the process of getting this whole area worked, especially a lot of tuning from students, we discovered that this low-level sadness that I'd been carrying around was present at the very outer edge of my field. It was my mother's. And it might have been her mother's, but we cleared it. You know, just this realization, like, oh my God, these emotions that I'm carrying around, I'm trying to fix and I can't, that the roots actually go deeper than your own psyche. And it's often a huge relief for people because they're like, I'm trying to heal and I've done all this work and I'm not getting anywhere, and it's like, it's not even freaking mine. Like, what a relief, you know? What a relief. What I just wanted to mention this, you know, I had all these questions, obviously, about this whole biofield, everything I'm talking about, right? This sort of biofield anatomy, this idea of these standing waves. And, you know, this is a really big claim for me to make, to say that I believe that your memories are stored in a bubble around your body, that consciousness is outside your body, that brain your brain is not producing consciousness. You know, that's the kind of standard model story, that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of brain activity, okay? But when did a thing ever precede the thought of a thing? ever, right? I mean, you know, just in our own existence, you think of something and then you make it, right? That things, if you look at states of matter, ether turns into plasma, turns into gas, turns into liquid, turns into solid, right? Matter precipitates from the finest to the grossest. So to say that the gross matter that is our brain is generating something fine, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's illogical. So this is a big claim. And so I'm curious about it too, because I've often wondered, am I making all this up? You know, did I make up this whole map? And am I just really charismatic and able to convince people that it exists, right? It doesn't really exist, but I just made it all up and I'm telling you it exists and you go out and you use that model and, right? I mean, that exists in the realm of possibility. In my book, I talk about a story with a dowser who was teaching a dowsing class at his home. And in his back 40, he, in his mind, constructed an earth energy line in a particular place. And he sent his class out to find it, and they did. And then he deconstructed it in his mind and sent them back to look for it again, and they couldn't find it. Okay? So that story makes me really wonder, like, am I making all this up? I don't know. So, you know, I really want to test this hypothesis. And part of, you know, that certified mail that I got from the universe back in the beginning here, it had a lot of instructions in it. It said that, that I was to participate in advancing the idea of the biofield in science and academia, that I was to participate in writing textbooks about the biofield. And so I did. Last year I wrote a chapter. I helped participate in a chapter on the biofield for a Chicago medical school. So that's kind of exciting that they're, you know, starting to reference this stuff. And I've amassed enough information, academic, that I can actually contribute. But what I've done is I pulled together a team of scientists, this organization called the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And Shamini Jan is actually a woman who, she took this picture, she's not in it, but you know, she was part of the early work that I referenced. If you look in the bibliography of my book, you'll see some papers by Shamini. So what we're doing is we're actually applying the scientific method to the biofield anatomy hypothesis. And we've been working for the last year and a half on developing a protocol to actually test this. And we've gotten a few small grants. We've gotten to the point right now where we're just about to put it into IRB submission. It's going in this week. So that's the Institutional Review Board who studies the format of the study to make sure that you're not hurting anybody, that it's ethically appropriate. And once we get a green light from them, we'll be able to go ahead. But what we're essentially doing in this study is we're setting up a table in a room with a research assistant and putting a body on it who's blindfolded and earplugged and bringing in 3 different practitioners separately to do scans of 4 zones and determine where these strong perturbations are. And so when they find a perturbation, they reference it to a tape measure on the floor and call it out to the research assistant who then marks it down. And so we did a pilot study of this, and I don't expect you to understand what that data means, but basically what it means is that there was sufficient inter-rater agreement in our pilot study for the scientists to feel like it was worth going on to a larger study. And if we can really demonstrate that 3 different practitioners are finding perturbations in largely the same areas, we've gone a long way towards supporting this hypothesis. And, you know, putting in a position where we can start to really understand how other so-called biofield therapies are working. I mean, what we're doing with tuning forks in the body's energy field is not much different than a Native American shaman rattling or drumming around a body or, you know, singing. I mean, it's the idea that there's stagnant, stuck energy. You need to break it up. You need to move it. You need to give it some different tonal expression. So if we can really show this, then, you know, we've gone a long way towards shifting the paradigm. And then what we want to do after that is develop a device that actually takes what the tuning fork does, changes in tonal expression, that the tuning fork reflects these areas of turbulence and resistance and create a technology that takes that and actually makes it visible. So, so that's kind of where I'm headed as well, in addition to sort of teaching all over the place. But, we're definitely continuing to, I was going for a PhD for a while because I wanted to be able to do this research, but you can't be a mom and a wife and a teacher and travel the world teaching and write 10-page papers in the middle of all of it. This is really not doable, no matter how light and clear and strong you are, if you want to have a relationship with your family. So, but this is going on, and I'm excited about this. We've been really making slow and steady progress towards testing it. And we are accepting donations. So, it's hard to find money for science, for this sort of thing. So if anybody's like, yeah, I want to support that, the Biofield Tuning Institute is a nonprofit 501c3